On March 2, 1942, Japanese destroyers detected the submarine USS Perch in the depths of the Java Sea. At that moment, its hull had already sustained severe damage. Depth charges dropped by the enemy had compressed it inward by 2 feet, approximately 800 centimeters. Water flooded through 17 fractures and breaches, and despite all efforts, the ship continued to sink. Every engineering calculation indicated that within 30 seconds, its hull should have shattered and broken apart. But this did not happen. Instead, the captain, in despair, opened the vents and released compressed air and fuel to the surface, hoping that an oil slick and rising bubbles would deceive the enemy into thinking the submarine had already been lost. Below in the holds, 59 men stood in complete silence, frozen by cold and fear. Their ship was slowly dying, and they were trapped inside. The story of USS Perch began in early 1935 at the shipyards in Groton. It was a Porpoise-class submarine, one of the first modern American diesel-electric submarines, designed specifically for long-range patrols and combat operations. Its keel was laid on February 25th, and it was launched on May 9th of the same year. At that time, it was a true technological breakthrough, as such submarines combined the power of diesel engines with the ability to operate underwater on electric motors. On the same day the submarine was launched, it was surfaced, and at that moment a woman named Helen Lorena Winters was standing on the platform. She was the one who sent the ship gliding over the waves, submerging it into the water. Her husband, Thomas Winters Jr., would later become an admiral and wear stars on his epaulets. The submarine was officially commissioned into the fleet in November of that year. It measured just over 300 feet in length, roughly the length of a modern American football field. Its beam was about 26 feet, with a design draft of 15 feet. On the surface, it could carry about 1,535 tons of water, which increased significantly when submerged. Its displacement reaching nearly 2,000 tons, roughly the weight of 1,500 passenger cars. However, in sea motion, it could reach the speeds of just over 19 knots, about 22 miles per hour. Such high surface speed made it one of the fastest submarines of its time, especially compared to smaller vessels intended for coastal operations. Underwater, however, its speed was significantly reduced, only about 8.5 knots, less than half of its surface speed. At the same time, to maintain such speed, the submarine could stay underwater for approximately 10 hours, after which the batteries would become low, forcing it either to surface or to drastically reduce speed. Its surface range was impressive, about 11,000 nautical miles, allowing it to cross the Atlantic Ocean and return without refueling. This range made it highly suitable for long operations far from friendly ports, especially considering the vast distances in the Pacific theater of operations. The submarine was designed for patrol and strike missions. It was armed with 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 at the front and 2 at the rear. It primarily carried 16 torpedoes, capable of damaging or sinking large ships. However, torpedoes of that era often malfunction, and reloading the tubes was time-consuming and challenging, especially in combat conditions. To combat small vessels and for attack without using torpedoes on deck, in 1937, after completing its initial training phase, the submarine Perch joined the 6-boat division of the Pacific Fleet's submarines. In its early years of service, it patrolled the cold waters of the northern Pacific, around the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands. These harsh waters were known for their unpredictability, strong storms, and low temperatures, making each voyage a real test for the crew. In the spring of 1941, as the weather grew slightly warmer, Perch and the fleet headed to the east coast of the United States to participate in large-scale exercises and test its capabilities in calmer waters. After this voyage, the submarine returned west to its permanent base in Manila, where it became the flagship of its division. From Manila over the following year, Perch patrolled the Chinese coast, visiting important ports such as Qingdao and Shanghai. The entire period leading up to the war was marked by tense observation. The submarine carefully monitored Japan's actions, analyzing every change in its strategic plans and troop movements. A week before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Perch escorted the 4th Marine Regiment, which was transporting troops to China. At that time, the ship was meeting transport vessels off Shanghai and ensuring their safe passage to the Philippines. The weather was calm, the war had not yet begun, but Perch was already on patrol, performing vital reconnaissance and escort duties. The morning of December 8, 1941, marking the beginning of a new era for Perch and the entire fleet, arrived. It was just 11 o'clock in the morning local time when the ship, moored at the naval base in Cavite, Philippines, under the command of Lieutenant Commander David A. Herda, received the first warning signals of alarm. Within a few hours and throughout the following day, Japanese bombers launched a powerful strike on the base. Their aircraft flew over Cavite, unleashing a barrage of bombs and rockets. As a result of the attack, the base was reduced to blazing ashes, and flames engulfed all its structures. At that moment, Perch found herself in the thick of the action, fulfilling her combat duties. Despite heavy fire and destruction, the submarine's crew played an important role in clearing the area, helping to concentrate efforts on rescuing personnel and mitigating the attack's aftermath. Most of the base was destroyed, and the Philippine naval base had lost almost all its combat-ready forces within the first hours of the war, significantly weakening the region's defenses. In a situation of complete devastation and enemy approaching, Perch decided to commence her patrol. She carefully navigated through the minefields near Corregidor Island and set out on her first combat mission into the deep waters between Luzon and Formosa. Her clear objective was to locate Japanese ships, monitor their movements, and, if possible, engage targets. Subsequently, the patrol moved northward toward Hong Kong. At the end of December, on one day, a large merchant ship appeared on the horizon, a vessel that could be an important target for reconnaissance. Perch launched 4 torpedoes, but all missed. Several days later, another opportunity to strike the enemy arose. A Japanese cargo ship named Nozima Maru. Perch again fired a torpedo salvo, and although she quickly disappeared because she was pursued by destroyers, it was later confirmed that the vessel was sunk. During this patrol, she could barely transmit signals over more than a few miles, a serious and almost unbearable limitation for a submarine. In such conditions, when every report of enemy positions was crucial for safety and mission success, this limited communication range became a real obstacle. Over 2 days, she recorded only one incident. She spotted 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers passing near the coast of Java. This signal became the last clear message anyone received. After that, communication completely vanished, as if the submarine had disappeared into the boundless darkness of the ocean. The crew received orders to proceed to Fremantle Port in Australia to continue their tasks after completing the patrol. However, on February 28th, new instructions arrived to ignore the previously set patrol boundaries and intercept a large enemy convoy approaching Java. On the evening of March 1st, 1942, when the clock showed late hours, the submarine surfaced approximately 30 nautical miles northwest of Surabaya. She moved on the surface to gain greater speed, as this allowed her to move faster and better control the situation. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, 2 Japanese destroyers, Amatsukaze and Hatsukaze, appeared directly in front of her. These were Kagero-class ships, specially built for fast and maneuverable movement. They were equipped with 8 24-inch torpedo tubes and 6 guns capable of firing at both aerial and sea targets, prepared to deliver devastating strikes. The destroyers, acting as convoy escorts, cut through the waves, rapidly approaching their target. Observers on board Amatsukaze first spotted the silhouette of the submarine, standing out against the dark sea as it moved on the surface. Without wasting a moment, the destroyer commander ordered the guns to open fire. Amatsukaze's 5-inch guns roared, and shells flew toward the enemy. They sliced through the air, exploding near the target and creating dangerous splashes and water bursts around the submarine. Water splashed upward as the destroyer's fire reached its target. Time was running out. Commander Perch immediately ordered the submarine to dive. She needed to submerge quickly to avoid a continuous barrage of shells. Lights flickered inside the submarine, and the crew began the diving procedure. She descended to a depth to hide from the fire. The crew had to quickly stabilize the vessel and prepare for countermeasures, approaching the enemy at a distance of about 800 to 1,000 meters. However, the destroyers already knew where the submarine was and were preparing for the next step. Launching depth charges. Perch ascended to 90 feet, about 30 meters, in hopes of avoiding danger. At that moment, 12 Type 95 depth charges were launched from here, each containing about 220 pounds of explosives set to detonate at a specific depth. The first group of charges passed by, exploding behind the stern, but the second group was very close. The explosions erupted with a force that literally struck the hull of the submarine. Water and pressure slammed into the hull, making it clear that the situation was extremely dangerous. Fasteners and rivets began to slip. Steel plates creaked and bent under the force of the blast wave. Internal valves shifted, seals cracked, and watertight seals burst. Water started flooding inside, filling compartment after compartment. Instrument readings changed, and some parts of the ship were affected. The crew remained at emergency stations, constantly monitoring the water level and managing the vessel's position to maintain balance and stability. Time passed, and just 2 hours after midnight, when the clock showed late at night, the submarine named Perch surfaced. Despite appearing battered and severely damaged, she was still fighting for life. Slowly and carefully, she turned eastward, as if trying to escape danger and find a safe place. The crew immediately began assessing the damage, understanding that every second counted. Despite everything that had happened, hope still flickered in the hearts of the crew, because the ship, though battered, remained alive. But this hope could vanish in an instant if they failed to repair the wounds and hide before the enemy turned back. Early in the morning of March the 2nd, Perch lay on the surface, still feeling the effects of the recent attack. Both periscope tubes were flooded and unable to function, completely depriving the submarine of underwater vision. Inside the hull, only half of the main engines remained operational, greatly limiting speed and maneuverability. The enemy Japanese patrols in these waters acted very aggressively, and any mistake could lead to a new attack. But despite the danger, the crew promptly emerged onto the rain-slicked deck, knowing that their survival depended on quick repairs. The damage to the hull was severe. The hull armor on the port side was deformed. Metal plates were pushed inward by 18 to 24 inches, far exceeding design standards. The main machinery tried to reinforce the warped steel with wooden supports because they understood that if urgent measures were not taken, the weak spot could completely break apart during the next dive. A 3-inch circulation water pipe was ruptured, and water flooded into the engine room, flooding it. Without this cooling system, the engines could not run for long. They had to be started in short bursts to prevent overheating. The damaged ventilation valves had to be forcibly closed to prevent dangerous flooding of key compartments. A clearly visible but leaking hatch of the engine room posed a threat of flooding, as water could enter through it. Open seams and torn gaskets had to be sealed with makeshift materials, from pieces of fabric and rubber to wooden wedges. These improvised patches had to withstand the pressure of deep-sea immersion, as any misstep could be the last. Every movement in the darkness was dangerous and required utmost caution. Time was running out, and every sound could reveal their position. Work in the pitch darkness turned into a real struggle. Every effort was aimed at saving the submarine and getting out of the dangerous situation. The constant threat of approaching destroyers kept the crew on edge and in full combat readiness. They were prepared to dive immediately at any moment, although damaged systems made the dive slow and hazardous. Amid this tense situation, the crew found small victories: patched holes, closed valves. Each such small victory granted them extra hours of life, the opportunity to continue the fight. Despite all the damage inflicted, their fighting spirit remained strong. They did not consider the mission complete. Their goal was still to strike back at the Japanese convoy. Before dawn, the crew hurriedly finished repairs to prepare for a possible new confrontation. From the gray horizon, enemy ships appeared. The destroyers Ushio and Sazanami, both of the Fubuki class, among the first modern destroyers in the world. Fast and armed with powerful weapons, they responded quickly and decisively. That was what distinguished the torpedo boat team in a dangerous situation. They immediately launched new attacks, firing another wave of depth charges that tore through the water around the submarine named Perch with a thunderous roar. The explosions of the powerful charges created strong waves and shock waves, which struck forcefully against the already exhausted hull of the vessel. Inside, under the impact of these powerful blasts, the systems began to groan and gradually fail, while the crew fought to regain control of the submarine, trying to cope with the critical situation. However, all their efforts proved futile. The propulsion system completely failed, and steering the boat became impossible. Perch lost the ability to move and remained motionless, like a lifeless target in the depths of the ocean. Meanwhile, the killer ships, torpedo carriers, continued their attack, dropping one wave of depth charges after another, hoping that their target could no longer escape or resist. The fight continued until the early morning hours, when the enemies, convinced of total defeat, retreated, leaving Perch silent in the depths of the sea. Water flooded inside through numerous damages, through the conning tower hatches, the engine room hatches, and cracks in the hull that allowed water in. The 3-inch circulation piping connecting vital systems was torn apart, and critical compartments quickly filled with water, while the pumps strained to cope with the increasing flow. Inside the vessel, temperature and humidity rapidly rose, creating an oppressive atmosphere that suffocated the crew and hampered engine operation. Gradually, systems began to fail one by one. The pressure-resistant shell filled with seawater, and the submarine's response became increasingly sluggish and awkward, making it impossible to dive. The commanders and officers gathered together, realizing there was no other way out. Remaining underwater would mean plunging into even deeper darkness and sinking, a fatal fate for the vessel and its crew. With heavy hearts, they ordered Perch to surface, despite all the damage and dangers, to reveal her before the enemy's eyes, but also to give themselves a chance at salvation and continued resistance. Soon after, emergency teams began working on the deck. They did their best to save the vessel, and after prolonged efforts, they managed to start at least one of the 4 engines, which provided a weak speed, about 5 knots, allowing the ship to drift slowly on the surface, almost in a semi-stationary state. After covering a short distance, the crew decided to attempt submerging again. However, the boat began to sway and list, and water started flooding in faster than it could be pumped out. The vessel listed so dangerously that it seemed it would soon disappear beneath the waves, losing control and sinking into complete chaos. The crew desperately fought to avoid sinking entirely. At that moment, it became clear. Perch was no longer capable of moving underwater. It was forced to stay on the surface, exposed to the enemy, vulnerable and defenseless. Despite all the destruction and dangers, the crew clung to their last hope, the possibility of escaping and being rescued. By evening, Perch was a wrecked heap of metal still afloat on the enemy's sea. One engine was functioning slightly better, the others were silent. The mechanisms were damaged, the electronics short-circuited, and the batteries leaking acid. The submarine's protective systems had completely failed. The 4-inch deck gun was out of order, and the torpedoes, damaged by deep charge attacks, were stuck in their tubes and could not be used. On the evening of March 3rd, the enemy returned to the combat zone. Darkness descended on the ocean's surface, but even in the bleakest hours, powerful beams from enemy searchlights lit up the sky, resembling giant eyes scanning the water's surface, trying to detect any signs of movement. These bright streaks of light slowly, but persistently, cut through the darkness, enveloping the surrounding space. At that moment, silence was broken aboard the submarine Ushio. Its main artillery salvo suddenly roared, a powerful sound echoing throughout the ship, and at the very first moment, the projectile hit its target, destroying the conning tower of the Oken, wrecking the remains of the damaged structure. The explosion was so powerful that it shattered any hope of salvation. The impact was so strong that the damage quickly deepened, and systems began to fail one after another. Soon an order was given to scuttle the submarine. Lieutenant Kenneth Schacht and his crew descended below the waterline to destroy valuable documents, code books, and cipher machines. They did not spare the equipment, smashing it beyond recognition as water rose around them. The crew hurriedly opened the hull valves, allowing seawater to flood in to finally sink the damaged vessel. The Oken was surrendering its fate. Its crew consciously yielded to the elements to prevent the enemy from gaining anything valuable. Meanwhile, shells whistled overhead, and the crew, one after another, hurriedly abandoned the ship, slipping across the slippery deck and plunging into the cold water. Enemy fire scattered bullets across the surface like lightning, and each moment became decisive. The Perch quickly filled with water, sinking deeper into the ocean abyss. The depth rapidly decreased, and the ship slowly but surely disappeared beneath the surface, as if trying to hide forever. Eventually, the fire from the enemy destroyers ceased. The target was gone, and the enemy's hope of capturing it vanished. But along with it, the chances of uncovering the secrets of this submarine also disappeared. The Eternal Patrol. This is the naval tradition that states all crew members who die or go missing during service are remembered forever. All 59 people aboard the Perch managed to leave the vessel before it disappeared beneath the waves. Moments later, the Japanese destroyer Ushio lifted them from the cold ocean waters. Thus, they found themselves in captivity. They were taken to the recently captured Dutch islands in the East Indies, where they were sent to forced labor camps. There they were subjected to exhausting work in harsh conditions that lasted for many years. The war continued its course, while these people remained isolated, lonely, and forgotten. American command had no knowledge of the fate of the Perch. In April 1942, this submarine was officially declared missing. Nearly a year later, a Japanese radio station reported that some crew members had survived and were held prisoner on Shikoku Island, part of the Japanese archipelago. But this was a lie. The true location of the Perch and its crew remained a secret for a long time. Likely, this was done to avoid bombing by the Allies. In reality, the submarine was hidden deep within occupied Indonesia, concealed from enemy eyes. Only in August 1945, when Japan surrendered, did the truth finally surface. It became clear that most of the Perch crew had survived and had been in captivity in Southeast Asia all along. The wreck of the submarine Perch was discovered on November 23, 1966, Thanksgiving Day, by a group of international divers aboard the vessel MV Empress. This ship raised the remains of the submarine from the seabed, located northwest of Bouvan Island in the Java Sea. When the news of the discovery reached Robert Lenz, an 85-year-old survivor who was at home in Arkansas at the time, he showed genuine interest. He was eager to see what his boat looked like after all these years. At that moment, only 5 members of the Perch crew were still alive, making this event particularly poignant. Lenz, with his characteristic dry humor, added, "I left $35 in my locker on the boat. They probably still are there." He meant that the entire crew, having left the vessel, managed to escape. The boat is not considered a maritime grave. Nevertheless, as one of the 52 American submarines lost during World War II, the USS Perch still remains in memory as part of a history that will forever be in the status of on eternal patrol.